Hello everybody, welcome back. We're going to start off this video with just a very quick recap on the concept of groups. Namely, how do you group them, why you should group them, and also a new thing of how you can ungroup them. So first of all, in order to group objects together, we're just going to select them all. We can individually select them by just holding Shift and clicking on everything, or we can just click, drag, and marquee select everything, or we can just select everything from here. Select the first one, hold Shift, select the one at the bottom of the list, selects everything in between. That's everything in our scene, perfect. And then we can either go to Edit, Group, or we can just use the shortcut Control-G. So let's just do that. Control-G, that makes a group. Wonderful. We can click on this little plus sign next to the group to see all of the objects that have been grouped together. In this case, the sphere, the cylinder, the cube, the cone, and this torus that I played around with its initial settings with. By selecting the group in the outliner, not out here, you can't select a group out here in the viewport, but within the outliner, you can select the group. You'll notice, by the way, I just selected all the objects here. This has a light bluish grayish selection to it, but if I select the group directly from the outliner, we get this nice bright blue, which lets us know that we have selected the group itself. And with the group itself selected, we can now treat this whole thing as one. So we can move it around as one. We can rotate it. And we can scale it. Now, to ungroup stuff, we can either go to Edit, and we can just select Ungroup right here, which will ungroup everything, gets rid of the group, and everything's just back to its own individual pieces. Or, if we just do Control-Z to undo that, we can select the objects in here, in the actual outliner itself, and then using the middle mouse button, we can just grab hold of it and just drag it outside the group. And now the sphere is not part of the group anymore. So now we can manipulate this group without the sphere, because the sphere is not part of that group anymore. And we can do this for all the objects. We can do this for multiple objects at once, the cylinder, and now instead of holding Shift, I'm going to hold Control to select just the cylinder and the cone without selecting the cube in between. And again, holding the middle mouse button, just going to drag them out the group. Now they are no longer part of the group. They're individual objects. The group is now comprised of just the torus and the cube. Here they are together. I'll scale them up or not. And now I'll just go ahead and remove the cube. So now the group is just one object, which, there's not really much point to it. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove the torus as well. You can rename groups just by double-clicking them in the outliner. Same with any object. You can also do this in the attribute editor for any object or group. You can rename them here in the attribute editor, but I always prefer just double-clicking here and just renaming them as such. For example, test. It's been mentioned a few times in previous videos, but I really want to start stressing the importance of it now. Naming your objects is going to be critical for your work, and you're going to see a perfect example of that in the next video. But for now, I would like to introduce you to the concept of hierarchies. I have 5 objects here. These objects are all named. We have this child, aka smallest doll, parent, second smallest doll, grandparent, third smallest doll, great-grandparent, second largest doll, and the ultra-parent, the largest doll. I am going to introduce the concept of hierarchies, and I gave these objects these names deliberately. So let's go ahead and actually start working with hierarchies. So the way they work is the order that you select objects is extremely important when it comes to hierarchies. So as an example, we're going to select our child, the smallest doll, first. Then holding Shift, I am going to select my second object, in this case the plane, aka the parent, aka second smallest doll. Now I am going to go to Edit, Parent, click it, and now this plane is the parent of this child, aka smallest doll. So second smallest doll is now the parent to smallest doll. What this means is that I can select the parent object, in this case the plane, and I now have control over both objects in movement, in scaling, and of course in rotation. Think of it as the parent dragging the child along. So wherever the parent goes, the child must follow along. Whereas if you were to select just the child, the parent doesn't have to follow along. So I can treat this sphere as an individual, and then select the parent, and drag the child along from there. Same thing from the outliner. I can select the parent here, and that automatically also selects the child for anything that I wish to do with this. Or I can select just the child itself, which is nested into the parent, and just have it move along on its own, or scale along on its own, or rotate along on its own, as you can see. Now I'm going to have this parent object selected, i.e. the plane, and I'm going to make it the child of the grandparent, aka third smallest doll, which I believe is the torus. So I'm going to select the plane, and then I'm going to hold Shift, I'm going to select the torus. So again, selecting the plane first, which also automatically selects the sphere because it's a child of the plane, but selecting the plane first, now I'm going to hold Shift and select the torus. And again, just like before, edit, parent. Now this grandparent, aka the torus, is the parent to the plane, which is a parent to the sphere, as you can see here in this breakdown in the outliner. Torus is parent to the plane, so I can move around and move around all three, since this one is the parent of all three. I can select just the plane, and that will also automatically select the sphere because it is the parent of the sphere, but the torus is no longer moving. And I can select the sphere, and that is the parent of nothing, therefore I can manipulate the sphere completely on its own. Continuing the process, I can do this for the great-grandparent and for the ultra-parent. There is another way of doing this aside from just having to select your first object, aka the torus, and then shift selecting the great-great-grandparent, aka the second largest doll, which I believe is the cone. So I could do this, I could select the torus, then hold Shift, select the cone, then edit parent and such. But you can also do this within the outliner itself. Similar to how when we created groups, we were using the middle mouse button to drag stuff out of groups, we can also use the middle mouse button to drag objects and nest them into other objects. So we can take our grandparent, aka third smallest doll, which is this torus, and we can hold the middle mouse button and drag it in to great-great-grandparent, aka second largest doll, aka the cone. So now the cone is the parent to the torus, the plane, and the sphere. Going deeper, torus is parent to plane and sphere. Going deeper, plane is parent to the sphere. And going deepest, the sphere is parent to nothing. Therefore, you can move this around on its own. And continuing on with the process, we can also make this great-great-parent the child of ultra-parent right here, completing our hierarchy. So now we have the cylinder, which is the parent to everything. Cone, which is parent to torus, plane, and sphere. Torus, which is parent to plane and sphere. Plane, which is parent to sphere. And of course, sphere is parent to nothing, so you can move this around completely on its own freely. Hierarchies are a very important and powerful tool in Maya. The next video is going to show us a lot more as to why. But before we do that, let's go ahead and undo what we've been doing here. And there's a couple of ways of doing that. We can just go ahead and select our hierarchy. We can go to Edit. We can go to Unparent. It's already parent. Let's see. Yes, that's why. Because I need to select all the child objects, not the parent objects. So instead of just selecting here within the outliner, I can just marquee select everything here and go to Edit and go to Unparent, and that is going to undo my hierarchy work, as you can see. So now everything is on its own again. Undoing that, if I were to select just the cone right here, and I believe I went to Edit on Parent, yes. The parent object, the cylinder, is no longer connected to my hierarchy anymore, so now the cone is the ultimate final parent in this hierarchy situation that we have going on here. And I can go deeper, I can select the torus, and go to Edit, Unparent, which removes the cone's control over everything that it was parent of. I can go to the plane, I can unparent this. Now the torus is no longer the parent to the plane. And of course I can select the sphere, which is the ultimate child, unparented, and its immediate parent, the plane, is no longer its parent. Another way I can do this is, let's go ahead and make it a hierarchy all over again, just so I can show the other way of doing this, which I think is the easier way, honestly, is by simply just taking an object and just middle mouse dragging it out of the hierarchy that is in the outliner. So now the cylinder is no longer the parent to all of this. And if we go deeper, we can make it so that the plane is no longer the parent, is no longer the child of torus here. So now we have two hierarchies that we have here. We have this plane and torus, with the plane being the parent and the torus being the child. And we have this cone and torus situation. Sorry, I said plane and torus. I mean plane and sphere, with plane being the parent and sphere being the child. And the second one where we have cone as parent and torus as child. And again, I can keep separating just to keep breaking these hierarchies and get them back to how it was before they were all hierarchies. So now they're all individual objects that can be treated individually once more. Again, hierarchies are a very, very powerful concept in Maya, and it's going to be in your interest to practice these as soon as possible and start getting the hang of them. Just, spawn in some random primitives like I did, maybe give them names and just practice, making things children's and parents of each other. So now I just made the torus the parent of the plane, moving them around, scaling them. I'm going to unparent just by going to edit unparent by selecting the child object of the torus's child object. I'm going to go to edit unparent. There we go. It's free again. Hierarchies are a very powerful tool. I would absolutely recommend you practice them. We're going to do a simple exercise with them right now. Okay, in between cuts, I went ahead and got rid of the previous primitives that I had before. Now we're going to build a hierarchy with intent and go over another reason why they're just so useful. Let's go ahead and make a cone here. I'm going to go ahead and scale this y to 2. And then immediately, I'm going to go ahead and go to Modify, freeze my transform. So now this non-uniform transforming that I did on the y-axis will be the norm for this cone. So now the scale is back to 1 by 1 by 1. This is now the normal default scale for this cone, thanks to Modify, freeze transforms. Next thing, I have these two inputs here as my history for the object. And I don't need that history anymore. So I need to go to Edit, Delete by Type, History. It is going to be very, very important moving forward that you very, very often freeze your transforms and delete type by history. It is going to be very important. It's going to prevent weird things from happening when you model and create scenes. So I would recommend making it part of your workflow to every so often go to Modify, Freeze Transforms, Edit, Delete by Type, History. Centering pivot is also important, but we're going to discuss a different thing that we're going to do with pivots in just a little bit. So for now, we have this cone. Let's go into our front view, our front orthographic view. I'm going to duplicate the cone. I'm going to go ahead and snap to grids. I want to place this cone just at the tip of the previous one, and I'm going to repeat the process until I have 5 of these. So 4 and 5. And now we're going to go ahead and create our hierarchy, which is going to be very simple. This bottom one is going to be the parent to all of these. So in order to do that, I'm going to take this top one, make it the parent to cone 4. Doing it the other way now, I'm going to select cone 4, shift select the cone right below it, edit parent, and just go back to the other way with the outliner, cone 3, middle mouse drag into cone 2 to make cone 2 the parent to everything above it, and then finally, cone 1 is now the parent to everything above it. Perfect. Let's do some quick testing. Snap to grids is still on. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. Good. The bottom one controls everything just as I want it to. Scaling is fine. Transforms are good. Cone 4 controls everything above that. That's good. This one controls that. This one controls all of these. And this one controls everything above it. That's great. But you can already notice that our hierarchy is a little bit weird in the sense that we can select, one of these, and they're not rotating in the way you would maybe hope for in something like this, where you would hope that maybe things would rotate from here in order to give a sense of connectiveness and, purpose to our chain here, as opposed to just random objects that are just sort of rotating off on their own. And we can do that. We can actually change the pivot points of our objects. We can modify the pivot point so it's always at the exact center of any particular object we're working with, but we can also ourselves just move the pivot point around to wherever we would want it to be. So in our case, in order to do that, we're going to have an object selected, and we can see that we have the move tool. So we can also do this with the rotate or the scale tool, but it's best to do this with the rotate tool, and just press D on your keyboard. And that is going to allow us to move the pivot point around. So now I can put this pivot point up here maybe, and then press D again to set that pivot point. And now when I rotate from the point of this cone. Maybe for some reason I wanted to have the pivot point over here. And press D again. Now the cone is rotating from the pivot point that's over on the side. Moving pivot points is going to be very important moving forward. For our purposes, I actually want my pivot point to be, I'm going to go ahead and select snap to grids, because you can also snap to grids with the pivot point. And move this right at the base. Press D to keep that change. Select the one below it and just go through the process again. So select D, place this at the base, D to set that, D to move the pivot point, set it at the base, press D again to cement my decision, press D here to move my pivot point around, place it at the base, D again in order to keep it there, D, moving my pivot point, placing it on the base, pressing D to cement my decision there. Perfect. Now, let's test this. I'm going to turn off snap to grids. From the bottom one, they all move as they did before, which is fine, but if we start from, let's go ahead and just unlock, just look at the entire hierarchy here. If we select the next highest cone, now we get something that has more intent behind it. This is now rotating in a way that is more sensical, and we can create more interesting shapes like this. Maybe you're already starting to see a use for something like this, maybe in something like animation. Hierarchies aren't just important for organization, they are very important for animation as well. You do something like that, that's pretty fun. We can also make our hierarchies more complicated by selecting, say, this one, and Control D, and just adding more here. So now we have another line here, and maybe we can add yet another line by Control D again. Maybe I can go to this one right here, Control D, and add in all of this as well. Maybe now I can go up here. Just make it really complicated to drive home the power of hierarchies here. Maybe add some of that. Maybe add some of this. There we go. That's a real Frankenstein situation. Let's go ahead and take a look at this hierarchy right now. Let's see what we got here. As you can see, hierarchies can get very, very complicated very, very quickly. How many objects we have. Everything is parented as someone else. In this case, I haven't named any of these objects, so it's going to be very, very confusing to find your way around in something like this. But boy, oh boy, does it make for some very, very interesting combinations of shapes that you can create here. Again, hierarchies are useful not just for organization, and that really comes in when you're naming your objects, as you'll see in the next video, but it's also very useful for things like animation. We have something pretty interesting here that we could animate if we wanted to, and maybe we will in a future video, who knows. Look at that. Let's make this even more complicated to wrap it up. Let's take this and duplicate it to create a second one. There we go. Now we have 2 of these with all of these objects. And maybe I will go ahead, actually, you know what I can do with that. I'm going to go ahead and take that, and I'm going to place that right at, I'm just going to be eyeballing it for this, but normally I would probably do snap to grids and moving the pivot in order to place this directly here, but maybe I can place that right there. So now this one, so now that we have this cone selected, which has everything that is a child of it also selected, we're going to shift select this cone here, and I'm going to edit and parent. And now this is the parent to all of that as well. So now we really have something crazy going on here. Now we really, really have a giant hierarchy here that we can look at. And look at just how much more complicated this is going to get. I've probably edited until I have gotten to this point, but hierarchies, very useful, not just for organization, but they're also useful for animation. Next time we're going to look at something even more purposeful. We're going to create a human character using just primitives and hierarchies. They're very powerful. I would absolutely recommend you test out hierarchies for yourself. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.